So for the last question from Aterika in church, she asked, how can you be a Ruth waiting for your Boaz? So if you don't know the story of Ruth and Boaz, it's in the Bible. The book is called Ruth. And I read a book called The Lineage of Grace by Francine Rivers last year. And she told of 5 amazing stories of 5 women in the Bible who I didn't realize were all related or are all part of the lineage of Jesus. So Ruth is one of them. She's actually the grandma or great-grandma of King David. So, if you read through the story of Ruth, she's a Moabite. She's not even an Israelite. She's not part of God's chosen people. But she married an Israelite, and he was the son of Naomi. So Naomi was, her family traveled from one place to another, and then back again. When she arrived with her family, she ended up losing her husband and her 2 sons. So all that was left to her was Ruth and Orpah. So Naomi told them, you know what, I'm going to go back to my homeland because God's been good to them. There's no famine anymore, and you both have to go home. You're still young, you're still beautiful, you can marry into a better family. So after arguing and all, Orpah decided to leave. She couldn't leave everything that she knew behind. But Ruth, she demonstrated loyalty and a heart like nothing else. Because she was like, where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. She said, where you die, I will die. Your God will be my God, your people, my people. Like, that was how strong she was when it came to her dedication and loyalty, her commitment and responsibility as a daughter-in-law. So what happened was they went back to Naomi's old place where she lived, and basically they had no one to take care of them. And so she told Ruth, like, okay, you follow into the fields and you gather the leftovers. So basically Ruth ended up gathering in a field of Boaz. So Boaz I forgot, as long as he's a relative of Naomi, I forgot the term, but he eventually found out about Ruth, and they needed a kinsman redeemer, something like that term. So Naomi told Ruth, you know what? We're going to go through this process, and we're going to see if Boaz is the guy who's going to take care of you. So basically, this is a love story of the Bible. This is one of those amazing love stories. So in the end, after following Naomi, after being such an obedient and kind and loyal girl, Boaz eventually redeemed the family of Naomi, and he married Ruth. Now, that all didn't happen in a week like it does in movies. It happened over time. And it took a lot of patience, it took a lot of heart, it took a lot of, Ruth was so obedient to her mother-in-law. She wasn't even her mother. Ruth had to leave all of that behind because she knew that something was different about Naomi, and she had to take care of this woman of faith. So when she went back with Naomi, she just obeyed everything Naomi said. She worked with all her heart. She could have been mocked. She could have been seen differently because she's a Moabite. But no, she still kept going. She still took care of her mother-in-law. And that resulted into not just finding a marriage, but being a blessing for generations to come. And so this question is more on how can we be like Ruth? How can we be someone who's so loyal, someone who's so kind, someone who stays even when that person loses so much? How can we be someone who obeys so quickly? How can we be someone with the right heart, with the right mindset, a vision? And you know, Ruth and Boaz, when they had their first child, which was Obed, the grandfather of David, they could have easily kept him for himself. But because Ruth was that amazing and Boaz was equally as amazing and God-fearing, as promised, they gave Obed to Naomi as the son, since she lost her 2 sons and her husband. And so that was already a sign of just showing how Ruth on her own was already so loyal and amazing. Paired up with Boaz, there's a double superpower right there. So in order to become like Ruth, we have to take a step back and look at each detail. So based on what I read in the Lineage of Grace when I talked about Ruth. The one thing that for us as women, and this could be applied to guys as well, is that you really have to evaluate where you are right now. Like, how are you in your faith? How are you in your emotions? How are you mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally? Because in order to find that heart to be loyal, it doesn't come overnight. It doesn't come just because you read something so inspiring and you're like, yes, I want to be loyal to this person. Like, it's not like that. It's built up. Trust is built up over time. Same thing with these. You don't gain character just because you read a good book. You gain it over time with experience, with your heart just put in the right place. And so if we want to be a Ruth waiting for Boaz, if we want to be a person that is waiting for God to give the right person at the right time, first of all, we shouldn't even focus on that. We shouldn't be living every life like, God, I'm going to pray a lot today. I'm going to spend time with you today and talk to other people today so that when he comes, I'll be ready. Like, no. Yes, we prepare, but not because we're focusing on the blessing. We should be preparing because we love the blesser. Because sometimes I guess we get distracted. Like, I want to be like this and this and this, because I want my husband or my wife to be like this and this and this. But actually, like I said earlier, relationships are not about us. They are important for us to work on ourselves so that when we're with someone, we can be powered up. But that's all meaningless if God isn't in the center. So if we want to be like Ruth, we have to first really know who we are, know what we want, know our choices. Are you ready to commit? It doesn't just have to be to a guy. Are you committed to your studies? Are you committed to your work? Are you committed to your family, to the goals that you have personally? Because we can't just keep expecting that everything good or everything that we need to work on comes when we have a relationship, because our relationship will reflect on how we are working on ourselves right now. Another thing is that when Ruth, so after you evaluate yourself and you already see where you are, what you want to do, another thing that Ruth did, in the book, it's written in a fictional way, like it's written in a story way. It's based on the Bible, but written in a story. So it's read from Ruth's and Naomi's point of view. So in Ruth's point of view, she had to keep going back to her family and tell them, no, I'm not staying here. I'm going with my mother-in-law. I don't want to worship your idols. I don't want to worship your gods. I don't need the riches. I want to be with a God who's alive. And Naomi knows him, and I want more. That was her heart. She evaluated herself, meaning she knew that my life is not enough. My life with riches, according to the book and based on the Bible, it's like Ruth came out from a good family. So it's like she evaluated herself knowing that she's rich. She can be well taken care of. She can get married again into another family. But after evaluating herself, she decided, she made a decision that was guided by God to take this next journey. And that is something that we oftentimes don't do. They tell us that and they encourage us at church to, like, every decision you gotta involve God. And what I realized over time was that God's not always going to talk to us in that voice like, hey, do this and do that. No, sometimes it comes from the wisdom he gave us that we have to make the choice. And so, aside from Ruth evaluating herself, she made that choice. She knew that there's a God out there who is so much more than she's ever experienced, and Naomi knew him. And she wanted more. That's where she made her decision, that by faith, if I go to this place, I will know a God who is amazing, who is unlike any other. So they traveled. I didn't realize in the Bible that whenever they say travel, it actually could mean a year or months, because they had no cars and camels are slow, and there were robbers and people who would just attack traveling caravans and all. So I didn't realize it until I read the book. I was like, wow, Ruth put up with a grumpy old woman, because in the book, like, Naomi would complain and all because she was also kind of bitter that God took everything away from her. So it's like, you're a young girl, you're putting up with a cranky old woman, you're traveling on your feet, and you barely have any place to sleep, eat, or drink before you reach your destination. Like, that takes a lot of patience. But like I said, we don't develop that overnight. It has to come from a heart that is set on a decision that is given, guided by God. And so for me, if you want to be a Ruth, you evaluate yourself, and then you ask for a God-given vision. Like, it can't just be you. when I do these things, I always pray like, God, I don't want this to just be me speaking. I want this to be you speaking through me, because I can't keep making decisions or being impulsive, because without God, it's all meaningless anyway. And I guess another thing that Ruth showed was you have to be diligent. Ruth was diligent in picking up leftovers. We are blessed to be able to go to school, to be able to serve at church, to work, that we don't have to pick after anyone's leftovers. If that's your kind of life, then just know that that's not the end either. Because when Ruth started picking up these leftovers, her diligence was rewarded with Boaz. Like, who would have thought that just by being a good and diligent girl, trying to serve God and serve her family, that God would bless her with more than she could ever ask or imagine. And that is God's promise, not just to Ruth, not just to Naomi, but it's a promise to us. In Ephesians 3:20, he already said it. In Jeremiah 29:11, he already said that he has a plan with a hope and a future for us. And if we want to see that, especially in our relationship, if we want to have a hope and a future in a relationship that is better than we can ever ask or imagine, we need to have diligence. Diligent in what we're doing now. Because like I said, we can't wait to give our full best when we're in a relationship. We have to start now. Just like in giving. The sooner you give, like my dad, he taught us to save. And so I started by saving 1 peso each week. Then it became 10, and then now it's like whenever I can give extra, I would save it. And of course give to tithes and offering. So it's kind of like it's hard for you to give your best when you haven't even given in the small things. Because like I said, small things often make the big things. So if we're not used to working hard right now, it's going to be harder for us to catch up when we're in a relationship. And so when Ruth finally ended up with Boaz, I believe that was a picture that both of them grew on their own. Because Boaz, he also had a point of view in the book where it's kind of like he also doubted himself, because he was doing his best, but then like, what if it wasn't enough? And sometimes that's what we feel. What if, God, I'm doing all that I can, but then why does it seem like nothing's happening anyway? That's where you have to be consistent, because God sees. He knows. He hears your heart. He knows your desire. He knows who you want to end up with. He knows the characteristics you want, but the thing is, he's not always going to follow it, because he has the perfect person for you. The person himself, herself is not perfect, but he is perfect for you. And so I think that in waiting for a Ruth or a Boaz, whichever situation you're in, evaluate yourself, because that's where you have to grow on your own. You have to let God water you and prune you to make you the best person you can be. You have to ask God for direction, ask him for a vision, ask him for words, and don't just ask him. Do your part to listen, to hear what he has to say as well, so that you can be diligent in working for that. You can just keep working, keep praying, keep fasting, keep loving others in that situation in this season while you're waiting for your Boaz or your Ruth. Because in the end, fourth thing to do, you can't just stop there. When Ruth and Boaz ended up together, that wasn't the end. Their consistency from the very beginning, from Ruth knowing what she wanted in life, from Ruth making a decision based on faith, for Ruth being diligent in everything that she did afterwards, it had an effect on the influence that she left for generations. Because as mentioned earlier, the way you start isn't going to define the way you end. She could have done all this, but then when Boaz came, she could have turned on a different road. Thankfully, by God's grace, that's not what happened.